Jack the Ripper, the mysterious serial killer whose identity has long remained a mystery.
That is.
Until
For over 130 years, a shadow has haunted the fog-laden streets of Victorian London, a name whispered in fear and fascination. Jack the Ripper. 5 women, brutally slain, their mutilated bodies strewn across the grimy alleys of Whitechapel, sparked a panic that gripped an entire city. The police were baffled, the public terrified, and the media voracious, amplifying every gruesome detail. Yet despite the notoriety, the Ripper vanished into the mists of history, leaving behind nothing but terror, speculation, and a haunting legacy that would endure for generations. Fast forward to 2025, when a bombshell claim ignited the world once again. Experts alleged they had finally solved the case. DNA evidence, historical records, and cutting-edge forensic analysis now pointed toward a single man, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and barber with a shadowy past. The revelation shook historians, enthusiasts, and true crime followers alike. Could it really be that simple? Could one troubled man, lost in the crowded streets of Whitechapel over a century ago, finally be unmasked? Or was this just the beginning of another heated controversy, one that would ignite debate and skepticism in equal measure? Kosminski's story is as chilling as the crimes themselves. A man living among the noise and chaos of London's poorest district, seemingly ordinary yet harboring a darkness that would make him one of history's most infamous names. For decades, speculation about the Ripper's identity ranged from aristocrats to doctors, journalists to sailors, each theory more sensational than the last. But the evidence that emerged in the 21st century carries an aura of certainty that had eluded investigators in the 1880s. And yet, it also raises questions more disturbing than the mystery itself. How could a man of frail mental stability orchestrate such violence with surgical precision? How could the most vigilant police force of the British Empire be rendered powerless? In this video, we will dive deep into the murky world of Jack the Ripper, exploring the grim streets of Whitechapel, the horrifying pattern of the murders, and the shadowy figure at the center of it all, Aaron Kosminski. From historical suspicions to modern forensic breakthroughs, we will unravel the chilling evidence, confront the doubts and criticisms, and examine whether the case is truly solved, or if the fog of uncertainty still hangs over one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. The story begins in the fall of 1888, where gas lamps flicker against cobblestones slick with rain, and the scream of a woman in the night could be your last. In the autumn of 1888, London was a city of stark contrasts. Towering monuments of wealth and opulent mansions cast long shadows over narrow streets filled with filth, squalor, and desperation. The East End, particularly Whitechapel, was a district trapped in time, its alleys congested with tenements, small shops, and overcrowded lodging houses. Gas lamps flickered through the fog, casting elongated shadows on cobblestones slick from the constant drizzle. Smoke from chimneys curled into the gray sky, mingling with the pungent stench of human toil and waste. Here, every day was a battle for survival, and every corner could hide danger. Whitechapel was home to a diverse population, many of whom were immigrants fleeing persecution or seeking opportunity in the heart of the British Empire. Polish Jews, Irish laborers, and countless other marginalized groups clustered together, forming close-knit communities within the larger chaos of the city. Yet, with poverty came crime, disease, and despair. Children ran barefoot through narrow alleys, scavenging scraps. Women sold what little they could, their lives balanced precariously between necessity and survival. The police struggled to maintain order, often overwhelmed by the sheer density and lawlessness of the area. Here, life was cheap, and death often came unannounced. It was into this landscape of shadows and desperation that the Ripper stepped. The murders did not occur in isolation. They terrorized a community already living on the edge. Overcrowding meant neighbors were close enough to hear the screams, but powerless to intervene. Streets were labyrinthine, twisting and turning, creating perfect opportunities for someone skilled at navigating darkness. The Ripper exploited this chaos, striking with both precision and timing. He was methodical, a predator adapting to the environment he stalked. Victorian London itself was a paradox. The city was a symbol of imperial power, wealth, and progress, yet beneath the grandeur lay suffering and neglect. Whitechapel epitomized the failures of an empire that prided itself on order and sophistication. Disease ran rampant, sanitation was poor, and social services were minimal. It was a place where women were vulnerable, men were desperate, and survival required constant vigilance. Into this vulnerability stepped Jack the Ripper, whose calculated violence exposed the fragility of even the most powerful systems. The public response was immediate and intense. Fear spread like wildfire through the streets and the press alike. Newspapers thrived on the horror, printing lurid accounts of each murder, sensationalized sketches, and unverified letters from the killer himself. The infamous "From Hell" letter, allegedly sent with a portion of a human kidney, captured imaginations and terrified citizens. Whether authentic or a cruel hoax, these communications amplified the panic. London's residents clutched their loved ones closer, avoided walking the streets at night, and whispered of a shadowy figure moving silently among them. And yet, despite the fear, life in Whitechapel continued. Markets bustled, children played, and barbershops hummed with conversation. The very ordinariness of daily life masked the presence of the extraordinary evil stalking the streets. It was a world teetering between survival and terror, where the flicker of a lamp could mean safety or death. The Ripper's murders were not merely crimes. They were events that revealed the raw, unfiltered darkness of a society struggling to maintain order, compassion, and dignity amid chaos. This was the stage on which history would remember the canonical five, and the shadow of the Ripper would be forever cast. It was a London where horror could blend seamlessly with everyday life, where the predator's path was hidden among crowds, and where the ordinary could become extraordinary in its encounter with pure, calculated evil. The autumn of 1888 was marked not by the turning of the leaves, but by screams that pierced the foggy nights of Whitechapel. The streets that should have carried only the mundane noises of carts, chatter, and horse hooves were instead filled with whispers of terror. 5 women would become forever entwined in history as the canonical five: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Their lives, already marked by hardship and vulnerability, were cut short, in a manner so brutal that it shocked even the most hardened of London's residents. Mary Ann Nichols, the first of the 5, was found early in the morning, her body discarded in Buck's Row. The precision of the wounds suggested not random violence, but deliberate surgical intent. Each incision, each mutilation, was methodical, demonstrating a cold calculation. Annie Chapman, discovered days later, near the backyard of Hanbury Street, bore the same chilling signature. Organs removed, her death a grotesque statement. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, murdered on the same night in late September, displayed an escalation of violence, an audacity that marked a killer growing bolder with each act. Mary Jane Kelly, the final victim, was found in the quiet of her room, her body mutilated so extensively that even experienced officers recoiled in horror. The sheer brutality of her death marked a crescendo to a spree that had terrorized the city. What makes these murders even more haunting is the consistency of the killer's methods. This was not a man losing control, it was a predator perfecting a routine. The Ripper struck in areas of dense poverty, taking advantage of the labyrinthine streets and the isolation of his victims. Each murder was an intricate act, both public in its shock value, yet calculated to avoid capture. The bodies were left where they could be found, but the killer ensured the precise removal of organs, as if testing both his skill and the patience of those who would try to stop him. The pattern suggested not madness alone, but a meticulous mind at work. The women themselves were emblematic of their environment. Most were struggling, living on the margins of society, making a living through small trades, or in some cases, prostitution, an occupation that exposed them to danger at every turn. Their vulnerability was not just a product of poverty, but of a system that turned a blind eye to the most desperate. By targeting them, the Ripper struck at both individuals and a society that allowed such peril to flourish. The terror was psychological, as well as physical. The community felt the predator's presence in every shadow, every alley, every late-night step outside. Newspapers of the era amplified this fear, chronicling every grisly discovery with lurid detail. Readers consumed accounts of dismemberment and mutilation, desperate to understand the incomprehensible. Letters allegedly sent by the killer, including the infamous "From Hell" letter accompanied by a human kidney, added an almost theatrical layer to the terror. Whether authentic or not, these letters fueled the myth, casting the Ripper not just as a killer but as a master manipulator, toying with both the police and the public. The canonical five were more than victims. They were symbols of vulnerability, of societal neglect, and of the unrestrained cruelty that one man could wield. Each life lost was a message etched in blood, a statement that terror could exist in plain sight, and that the shadow of Jack the Ripper would loom over Whitechapel forever. Their stories are not just grim footnotes of history. They are reminders of the darkness that can thrive amid chaos and neglect, and the lives that were extinguished to prove it. As the body of Mary Ann Nichols was discovered in the early morning, Scotland Yard faced a grim reality. A predator was stalking the streets of London, and he seemed always one step ahead. Hundreds of officers were dispatched to Whitechapel, but the labyrinthine alleys, the fog, and the dense crowds worked against them. Patrols were relentless, but the killer's knowledge of his environment rendered their efforts almost futile. Sketches circulated, descriptions compiled, yet the Ripper moved like a shadow, unseen and untouchable. The police were under immense pressure. Queen Victoria herself expressed irritation at the lack of progress, urging the Home Secretary to expedite the investigation. The media, sensing opportunity, amplified the horror. Headlines screamed of mutilation and terror, readers clung to every detail, and the panic that spread through Whitechapel seeped into the consciousness of the entire city. Scotland Yard faced not only the challenge of capturing a cunning murderer, but also the scrutiny of a fearful, anxious public and a voracious press. Detectives employed every tool at their disposal. Witnesses were questioned, residents interrogated, and stakeouts established across the alleys and lodging houses of Whitechapel. Suspects were compiled, described, and scrutinized. Doctors were consulted for their expertise on the nature of the injuries, their opinions contributing to the psychological profile of the unknown killer. Sketches of tall men in top hats, shadowy figures in cloaks, and suspicious pedestrians filled the press, creating a kaleidoscope of potential threats, none of which could be conclusively linked to the murders. Despite these efforts, the killer evaded capture. Each murder left the police scrambling, their methods and strategies exposed as inadequate against a mind both calculating and elusive. The Ripper seemed to revel in the chaos, mocking law enforcement with every act. Letters allegedly sent to the press and police, including the notorious "Dear Boss" and "From Hell" letters, taunted authorities, displaying both intelligence and cruelty. Whether these letters were authentic or the work of opportunistic hoaxers, they intensified fear and frustration, leaving Scotland Yard grasping at fragments of a puzzle that refused to be solved. Witnesses sometimes came forward claiming to have seen the killer, but the descriptions were vague, contradictory, or unverifiable. At one point, a secret lineup reportedly identified a suspect, but fear of anti-Semitic backlash prevented testimony, allowing the man to remain free. The limitations of contemporary policing were stark. No surveillance cameras, no forensic analysis. Beyond rudimentary methods, no rapid communication systems. The most thorough manhunt of the British Empire floundered in the shadows of Whitechapel. The case reached a dramatic halt after Mary Jane Kelly's murder. Her death, the most grotesque of all, shocked even seasoned detectives. Yet, after her killing, the attacks ceased as abruptly as they had begun. No letters followed, no bodies appeared, only silence, a silence that gave birth to legend. Jack the Ripper became more than a murderer. He became an idea, a specter of terror, a shadow bleeding out a statement in civilization that monsters existed, and that even the most powerful forces could be rendered impotent before true cunning and cruelty. The investigation, though exhaustive, for its time revealed both the limits of 19th century policing and the cunning of a predator operating in plain sight. Scotland Yard's efforts, though intense and thorough, were ultimately insufficient, leaving history with one of its most enduring mysteries. The unanswered questions: who was he? How did he disappear? And why could the world's greatest empire not capture him? Would linger for decades, haunting both investigators and the public alike. If you had walked through Whitechapel in the late 1880s, you might have passed Aaron Kosminski without a second glance. A quiet figure in the fog, perhaps standing outside a barber shop, scissors in hand, blending seamlessly into the crowd of laborers, immigrants, and street vendors. To most, he was just another face in the masses, a Polish immigrant navigating a hostile city, trying to survive. But to a select few detectives at Scotland Yard, he was a figure of deep suspicion, a shadow lurking in plain sight. Aaron Kosminski was born in 1865 in Klodowa, Poland, a land rife with anti-Semitic violence and persecution. Like many Jews of his generation, he fled Eastern Europe in search of safety and opportunity, eventually arriving in London in the early 1880s. He settled in Whitechapel, where poverty was rampant and tensions ran high. For immigrants like him, life was a delicate balance of assimilation and survival, a constant negotiation between opportunity and danger. Kosminski, by all available records, worked as a barber, a profession demanding precision with a blade, an ironic and chilling detail when considered in hindsight. Kosminski's proximity to the murders was striking. He lived within walking distance of all 5 of the Ripper's crime scenes, his routine overlapping with the locations of each killing. But it was not just geography that raised suspicion, it was behavior. Reports from the time describe him as increasingly erratic, socially withdrawn, and volatile, particularly around women. In a secret memorandum written in 1894, Sir Melville Macnaghten, an assistant chief constable at Scotland Yard, listed Kosminski as one of 3 key suspects. Macnaghten's note described him as having a great hatred of women, with strong, homicidal tendencies, words that carried the weight of Scotland Yard's most informed opinions. Despite the growing suspicion, Kosminski was never formally arrested for the Ripper murders. The police faced obstacles that would seem almost insurmountable today. No fingerprints, no blood analysis, no surveillance footage, and witnesses who feared social repercussions. Some officers reportedly identified him in a secret lineup, yet the witness refused to testify, worried that confirming the identity of a Jewish suspect could inflame anti-Semitic tensions in the already volatile East End. The manhunt stalled, the investigation stagnated, and Kosminski faded into obscurity, not as a hero, but as a lingering shadow over an unsolved case. His mental state deteriorated rapidly over the next few years. By 1891, Kosminski exhibited violent hallucinations and threatened his own sister with a knife. Authorities deemed him a danger to himself and others, ultimately committing him to Colney Hatch Asylum. Records from the institution describe severe delusions, auditory hallucinations, religious mania, and an inability to care for himself. He stopped bathing, spoke in fragmented thoughts, and was never released. He remained institutionalized until his death from gangrene in 1919. A tragic and quiet end, yet one that may have silenced a killer. One of the most unnerving aspects of Kosminski's biography is his profession. Victorian barbers were far more than stylists. Many performed minor surgical procedures, bloodletting, tooth extractions, wound treatment. Such skills, even if informal, provided familiarity with blades and anatomical precision. While Kosminski may not have been formally trained, the gritty, survival-driven streets of Whitechapel would have given him the rudimentary knowledge necessary to inflict the grisly, calculated injuries associated with the Ripper murders. Kosminski's story is one of contrast, an unremarkable immigrant living a fragile life, yet potentially harboring the capacity for methodical, cold-blooded violence. He existed within the fog and filth of Whitechapel, an ordinary figure by day, and, according to modern theory, a monstrous presence by night. For decades, he remained a footnote in history, a suspect mentioned in memoranda and whispered in archives, until the 21st century would shine a new light on his dark past, bringing his name back into the chilling conversation of one of the world's most infamous unsolved crimes. For over a century, the Jack the Ripper case existed largely in shadows, rumor, and speculation. Investigators had manuscripts, letters, sketches, and eyewitness accounts, but no concrete proof linking any individual to the murders. Then, over 100 years later, a breakthrough emerged, not from a weapon, a confession, or a new eyewitness, but from something seemingly ordinary, a shawl. The shawl, worn, stained, and forgotten, was said to have been found near Catherine. Eddowes, the fourth canonical victim, murdered on September 30th, 1888. According to family lore, Sergeant Amos Simpson retrieved the fabric from the crime scene, intending to gift it to his wife. She refused, and the shawl was quietly tucked away, eventually passed down as a morbid heirloom. For decades, it remained unnoticed, a relic of horror, carrying with it the faintest traces of history. In 2007, the shawl resurfaced at an auction. While most observers saw it as merely a macabre curiosity, author Russell Edwards saw potential evidence. He purchased the shawl with the intent to subject it to modern forensic scrutiny, believing it might hold answers that had eluded investigators for over a century. The task was entrusted to Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a molecular biologist who brought the power of 21st century science to an artifact almost forgotten by history. Using advanced techniques, ultraviolet light, microscopy, and spectrophotometry, Louhelainen began to examine the shawl. He discovered traces of blood that seemed to correspond with Eddowes' medical history, including the presence of Bright's disease, a kidney condition she was known to suffer from. That alone suggested the shawl had been present at the crime. Seen, a silent witness to the horror that unfolded that night. But the investigation did not stop at blood. Louhelainen identified microscopic fragments of saliva on the fabric. DNA analysis revealed that this genetic material matched the maternal line of Aaron Kosminski, linking the shawl, and therefore potentially the crime, to the long-suspected barber. The claim sent shockwaves through both historical and forensic communities. Could this single piece of fabric finally close a mystery that had haunted the world for generations? Despite the compelling nature of the evidence, skepticism arose immediately. Critics questioned the provenance of the shawl, noting that it had been handled by multiple people over the years and that contamination could not be entirely ruled out. Others argued that DNA tracing along the maternal line was not definitive proof of guilt. Still, the sheer convergence of historical suspicion, geographic proximity, and modern forensic analysis created a picture impossible to ignore. For many, the case against Kosminski now appeared stronger than ever. The shawl represents more than just a piece of cloth. It is a bridge between centuries, a tangible connection to a night shrouded in mystery. It embodies the evolution of forensic science, showing how techniques unavailable to 19th century police could now shed light on old enigmas. Blood, saliva, and fibers, elements that once seemed trivial, became the silent storytellers of history, whispering truths long obscured by time. Yet even as the shawl provided clarity, it also deepened the darkness of the story. Could a man, already suffering from severe mental illness, have carried out these meticulously calculated murders? How did he remain undetected by the most extensive manhunt of his era? And if Kosminski was indeed the Ripper, did the shawl also reveal the quiet tragedy of a mind lost to madness, forever imprisoned in an asylum, a life simultaneously mundane and monstrous? The discovery was both illuminating and unsettling. It suggested a resolution, yet left lingering questions. The artifact was a key to the past, but it did not reveal the full story, the psychology, the impulses, the motives. It was proof, but also a reminder of the complexity of human behavior and the limitations of historical records. In the end, the shawl connected us to Aaron Kosminski in a way that no memoranda or witness testimony ever could, giving his name a chilling prominence in the narrative of Jack the Ripper. The 21st century investigations anchored by this shawl show the interplay of science, history, and human obsession. One artifact, overlooked for decades, reopened a conversation that had seemed closed, challenging both skeptics and believers. It transformed a century-old mystery from legend to evidence-based debate, bringing a sense of resolution while simultaneously highlighting how much we still do not and may never truly know. Even as the shawl and modern forensic evidence brought Aaron Kosminski back into the spotlight, the case remained shrouded in uncertainty. Experts, historians, and skeptics were quick to point out the potential flaws. Could a mentally ill barber, institutionalized and unstable, truly have carried out the meticulously calculated murders that terrorized London? Some argued that the DNA evidence was circumstantial, derived from material handled by multiple people over more than a century, making contamination a very real possibility. The provenance of the shawl itself was questioned. Critics noted that it had been moved, touched, and stored in private hands before modern testing. Could the DNA have arrived through accidental transfer? Was the shawl truly from the crime scene, or had it been misattributed? Every new scientific claim brought renewed scrutiny, with forensic experts divided over the reliability of century-old evidence. Beyond science, there were historical and social complications. Kosminski was a member of a marginalized immigrant community, and police records suggested fear among witnesses of inflaming anti-Semitic sentiment. Could the focus on him have been influenced by societal bias rather than pure evidence? Others questioned whether a man with severe hallucinations and religious mania could carry out the methodical, precise violence attributed to Jack the Ripper. The mind that could navigate Whitechapel's alleys and execute these murders with surgical precision seemed at odds with the records of Kosminski's declining mental health. Even if Kosminski was guilty, the case left unanswered questions about the Ripper's psychology, his motive, and the possibility of accomplices or copycats. The murders had left a legacy not only of horror, but of myth, and every attempt to solve the case risked colliding with decades of legend, speculation, and cultural obsession. The closer modern science seemed to come, the more it highlighted the gaps that could never fully be filled. Ultimately, the controversy serves as a reminder. History is often messier than stories allow. Evidence can point strongly in one direction, but the shadows of doubt linger, especially in cases that have captivated imagination for over a century. Jack the Ripper may have a name now, but the debate, skepticism, and questions surrounding him continue to echo through time. Jack the Ripper was never just a man. He became a symbol, a mirror reflecting the darkest fears of Victorian society: poverty, misogyny, mental illness, and institutional failure. His murders revealed vulnerabilities not only in individuals, but in the empire itself, showing that terror could thrive even amidst power, wealth, and authority. Whitechapel's foggy alleys were more than crime scenes. They were stages upon which a predator tested society's limits. Aaron Kosminski, whether truly the Ripper or simply history's most plausible suspect, embodies the tension between ordinary life and unimaginable violence. A barber, a Polish immigrant, a man institutionalized for mental illness, he was, by all accounts, a person living a fragile, unremarkable life. And yet, through the lens of modern forensic science, he emerges as a figure capable of extraordinary brutality. The discovery of the shawl and the DNA evidence it carried bridges centuries, connecting a forgotten artifact to a man once hidden in obscurity. Even now, over 130 years later, the story of Jack the Ripper resonates. It reminds us of the fragility of human society, the shadows that can exist in plain sight, and the fascination we hold for understanding the incomprehensible. The mystery may have a name, but it will always retain its eerie, unresolved quality. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about fear, justice, and the darkness that can hide behind the most ordinary faces. Ultimately, the Ripper's legacy is more than the sum of his murders. It is the story of society's fears, the failure of institutions, and the enduring obsession with crime, violence, and the unknown. Even if Aaron Kosminski was the killer, the myth of Jack the Ripper will live on, a shadow bleeding through history, reminding us that some mysteries, no matter how close we come to solving them, are never fully laid to rest. Even more than a century later, Jack the Ripper's shadow lingers over London. The murders of Whitechapel were not merely isolated acts of violence. They created a legacy of fear that permeated the city and the collective imagination of society. The term Ripper has become synonymous with terror, a shorthand for the lurking danger of the unknown. For the residents of Victorian London, fear was a constant companion. Women walked with vigilance, men patrolled the streets in apprehension, and families shuttered windows long before nightfall. The panic surrounding the murders extended far beyond Whitechapel. Newspapers capitalized on the hysteria, selling stories that combined fact, speculation, and sensationalism. The press, whether intentionally or not, amplified societal anxieties, transforming the Ripper into a figure larger than life. A specter who represented both the dangers of the city and the failures of the authorities tasked with keeping it safe. Public fear fed the legend, and the legend in turn shaped public perception.